Welcome everyone and to the Feldenkrais Awareness Summit, Move Better, Feel Better. And we're working with our theme of fitness. And I'm delighted today to be introducing someone who specializes in working with riders. There's a lot of people in the Feldenkrais community who are involved with riding and with horses, and there are a lot of people who ride horses who are discovering the Feldenkrais method and how it can be helpful both for improving their riding as well as their relationship with their horse. Karin Major has been riding since she was a child. She said she was horse mad since she was a child, and she's been a horse instructor since 1979. Karin is also an approved Ride with Your Mind biomechanics coach, as well as a Feldenkrais teacher and she's a member of the British Horse Society and an instructor there. So Karin, welcome to Move Better, Feel Better, and how we can begin to develop our partnership, skill, and feel with our horses.
Thank you, Lavinia.
So, of course, everybody would love to know, how does one go from being horse mad to being Feldenkrais mad? Was there a journey involved there?
There was. I discovered Ride with Your Mind in 1999, I think it was. And it was through my mentor, Mary Wanless, who I went to one of her demonstration days, and there was a Feldenkrais practitioner there, Sheila O'Neill, who's from Bristol, gave a short presentation. Now, it caught my attention because I'd suffered with back pain and various loss of feeling in my legs right the way through from when I was 10, and I'd been hospitalized at that very early age and put on traction and to try and ease the pain. And well, initially I'd lost all the feeling, so they put me on traction and the pain came subsequently. And I'd struggled with that. So by sort of the year 2000, I was 40. I'd spent 30 odd years struggling with back issues, weeks on end where I'd be laid out flat on the floor. I'd tried all sorts of things to address it. Regular chiropractic treatment just kept me a pain threshold I could cope with. And when I discovered Feldenkrais, it was like a little light bulb going on. And I thought, well, I'm going to give it a go because it's something I haven't tried. And I used to go to regular weekend workshops with Sheila. We'd work for the weekend, and I'd go back and I'd find that my body was easier, the pain was less intense, less frequent. And of course, the more I did, the better everything got.
So was all of this pain the result of horseback riding injuries, or was it something else?
Nobody ever determined exactly what it was. I would say at the age of 10, I was quite active. I was riding and falling off, which children do all the time. I was swimming for my county team. The original loss of feeling came after intensive swimming training. And yeah, so no, the root cause was never diagnosed. So who knows?
Right. So it's interesting, you know, so many people we speak to become practitioners because of their own healing journey.
Yes.
And clearly, and throughout this whole time, even though you were having difficulty, you were continuing your passionate relationship with horses, correct?
That's correct, yes.
So as you discovered how the Feldenkrais method could help you as a person, how did that start to move towards your relationship with other riders, with horses? Can you speak a little bit about that?
So my Feldenkrais journey and my Ride with Your Mind journey were two very parallel paths. They were running at the same time. So I was discovering the biomechanics of riding at the same time as I was learning to become more aware of my body, and found that I was able to take the instruction perhaps better through my awareness of my body. So somebody would ask me if I could try something different, and I had something different to try, if that makes sense. A lot of people are kind of very stuck, and if you ask them to hollow their back more or round their back more, they might find that particular movement very difficult to do. But because I was exploring my movements with the Feldenkrais method, I found that I had a better understanding of ways I could change my body and reorganize my body. Does that answer your question?
Well, it's the beginning of the answer.
Yeah.
Because what I was going to go into next was then, have you begun, or, you know, over the years, then have you begun a strategy where you're just applying Feldenkrais principles while you're riding, or do you actually teach riders Feldenkrais? How do you integrate the Feldenkrais method in working with your riders?
Okay.
There we go. It took me a while to find the question.
So very often riders will come to me just for ridden lessons initially. And during those lessons, I will introduce them to the idea of Feldenkrais, and we might do some kind of exercises or mini lessons on horse. But the way I prefer to ride is to work is to have the riders off horse, to work with the rider on my table, very much in the way that other practitioners would, and then to take that back onto the horse. And I can very much target what it is that I'm looking for in that rider's body to make it more available.
So when you're working in, so we could say that you favor functional integration when you're working with these riders. Do you start with one of their challenges, or do you have a plan? I mean, do you watch them riding the horse first, or are you just addressing their individual questions?
Mostly I've seen them ride their horse before I start to work with them. But occasionally if they come to me with a particular body issue, then I may work with them off horse before I work with them on horse.
One of the questions that's coming up for me right now is, in your work with riders, are there, can you talk about some of the most common use of self challenges that you see riders have that can be helped by working with Feldenkrais, whether Feldenkrais principles or awareness through movement or functional integration? Can you talk a little bit about, you know, just some of those things that are most common that would help riders who might be listening right now?
Okay. So one of the most common issues that I see in riders is that they are sitting too tall and too hollow. So rather than, I'm looking for a rider to be in neutral spine.
Could you just define, I'm sorry to interrupt, but yes, could you just define too hollow, what that means to those of us who aren't riders?
Right. So if your front is more extended and your back is shorter, and you go chest up, then the back is hollow.
I see. So too far into extension.
Too far into extension, yeah.
Got it. Okay.
And when you go the other way, then you're too round backed. And neither of those positions are positions of strength. And they cause the rider to move around too much on the horse. So the force is coming through the horse's body rather than being absorbed by the human body or transferred by the human's body. The human body gets to rock around. And many people don't are not familiar with coming out of that extra extension.
So it's kind of paradoxical that by sitting too straight or holding yourself too tightly, you become unstable.
That's right.
And so how do you begin to educate people with that? I mean, it's wonderful to do functional integration, but like, let's just say I don't have access to a Feldenkrais teacher.
Yes.
Do you have any tips?
Yeah, so you might like to try this one.
Okay.
So if you sit on the front of your chair and put your hands underneath your seat bones.
Aha. Okay, hold on a second. Let me adjust myself. Although, yeah, you won't see my sit bones, but I will do that.
Okay, and I mean, I would talk to riders about slumping. So if they make the front of their body shorter and round their back, you'll find that your seat bones will slide off your fingers and tip forward. And then if you extend your front, lift your chest, you'll find that the seat bones will go backwards. And as you go between the two, you'll find you roll over the seat bones.
Yeah, I can definitely
and you're looking
feel
to
that.
find a place between the slumping and the extension where your seat bones feel like they have some clarity through onto your fingers, where they're pointing straight down.
Yes, and
yeah,
feels to me like my left sit bone is sort of in front of my right sit bone. Does that happen to people very often?
It does. It does. So again, that would be kind of further down the teaching, but the first thing is to get an awareness of the seat bones and where they point when they go too far forward and too far back.
Right.
And that starts to get you to the neutral spine place where you are more solid and more connected to the horse.
And I guess that's great. So you have this experience from the seat.
Yes.
Connecting the seat. And so how do these like, what levels of riders are you working with? Because probably if you're working with a beginning rider, you would speak to them a little bit differently than you would speak to an advanced rider, right?
That's correct. And I work with children from the age of 4 right the way through to international competitors in the dressage field. And the words you use to describe what needs to happen are different, but very often the basic concepts are the same. And you know, the more experienced riders can very often take what you're saying and do something with it quicker than the younger children. But with the young children, if you start them off the right way, I've often had, you know, children that are very young that start with me and then they disappear for 5, 6, 10 years and come back and they're in a good basic place. Very often when children have started riding and they've just been sat on a pony and allowed to do whatever comes naturally to them, then they have changes that need to be made. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Although the question that comes up for me in terms of working with experienced riders, I mean, having been a performer, I had, a lot of training, and because of that, I had a lot of habits.
Yes.
That and when you're dealing with experienced professionals, you've got two challenges, I think: interrupting their habitual way that may be interfering, but also maybe their self-image and their ego.
Yes.
How do you deal with that kind of a challenge, giving them the feeling of, you know, learning and excitement without threatening their perceived self-image, as Moshe would call it?
You have to make it playful. You have to make it sort of encourage them to give it a go. The wonderful thing is that the horses respond, and all of a sudden you can find that something that was a struggle becomes easier for the horse to deliver, rather than so the rider has to change, and they might think that change is very strange, but if their horse responds and gives them the movement that they're looking for, there's nothing that's much more convincing than that.
So the horse is the feedback
The
then.
horse is the feedback, yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so that, does that give them the possibility of a different kind of relationship? I mean, literally relationship with their horse?
It can do, yes.
And
Yes,
so,
because the more correct the rider gets, the more easily the horse can deliver what it can deliver. So there's always different aspects. There's the rider training and the horse training, and they have to be in harmony, obviously.
and so you said you prefer to work with people off horse. Do you ever kind of work off horse and then take them out and let them feel the difference right away? Or, I mean, how do you verify the experience for the rider?
Very often I will work with them off horse, and then, you know, we'll tack up the horse. So we might have a 15-minute break while we tack up the horse, and then they go and get on the horse straight away. They feel the difference in their body. Often the horse will respond, you know, a sluggish horse might go with more speed or more energy. A more forward horse might be more settled. A hollow horse might find it can round more. So it's you getting that feedback from working in an FI situation to working on horse. The feedback can be very clear.
Mm-hmm. And do you ever, in the places where you teach, do you ever have clinics or anything where groups of riders can work together on this through awareness through movement, or going on to the horse and applying principles as you're going along?
Yeah, sometimes I'll do like a weekend clinic where we do awareness through movement classes in the morning, and then the riders get to ride in the afternoon, and they can be thinking about various aspects that we've explored during the ATM lessons. That can be very beneficial for people.
Right, I was thinking it would. I wondered what kind of themes you would address when you're having one of these clinics. I mean, do you just say, you know, better riding, or do you have some themes that they can kind of latch onto?
Generally, I'm looking at better riding, but it may be that I focus on a particular topic. So one of my favourite topics for teaching is falling. Because very often nervous riders are nervous because they don't know how to fall. And then I'll do a workshop where the primary theme through the workshop is like a judo roll. So they learn how to do the judo roll, and that in turn gives them more confidence on horse, because they feel like if they were to fall off, it's not such a big deal.
That's a wonderful and really, I think, important subject, not just for horse riders, but for everyone to learn how to fall well. You know, but it's interesting and maybe challenging when you think about, especially like dressage, where the posture of the rider is, you know, supposed to be so elegant and so held in such a way, and then what you are teaching them is judo rolls.
Yes.
And how do those riders respond when they are presented with this sort of shift? Again, I keep talking about perceived self-image, but I think that with riders, there's so much about that in the way they're judged, in the way they maybe that how they've even chosen that they've chosen to do dressage because
Yeah.
of who they are. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's really important.
Yeah. I mean, one of the unfortunate things about riding is, like you say, a lot of those images come through about how the rider holds themselves up and they've got that extended posture. And too frequently it is overdone. And riders find it very difficult to back away from that. But then again, as I was saying, the horse is an amazing feedback tool. So when the riders experience the neutrality of where I want them to be, then they will discover that the horse moves differently. So there is a lot to kind of overcome in that way. What has to be remembered is that a lot of the words that go with teaching riding in the traditional way, so sit up tall, stick your chest out, will all be things that people have heard in riding arenas, were originally from the army, directed at young lads in their late teens and early 20s who tended to sit very slumped and round backed. They needed to find that more extended posture. Whereas the majority of females that I teach tend to come in with too much extension through their bodies in the first instance and then have to find a way to release it. The real extension of the body obviously affects the breathing, and the breathing gets to be very chest high when the front of the body is extended. And one of the things about riding is the lower your center of gravity is, the more you can breathe down into your abdomen, then you lower the center of gravity, you're much more likely to stay stuck on the horse and not be wobbled around so much.
Right. Another paradox, right? Because when you
Yeah,
go into that upper chest breathing, you're also communicating anxiety and fear to your horse,
that's
and
right.
you're more at risk of falling.
Yeah,
So going back to the possibility of, not being afraid of falling is something I think that not so many riding instructors emphasize or look at.
in terms of the breathing or
Well,
the
just
relationship with the
yeah,
horse.
just the whole concept of feeling, as you put it, stuck in the saddle, but not stuck in the saddle through tension.
That's right. And I mean, tension is one of those interesting things, because if, again, you'll hear in a lot of riding arenas, you need to relax. Now, the ultimate of total relaxation is the body would be a puddle on the floor. Whereas you have to hold enough body tone to hold yourself, and enough body tone to hold yourself in a way that makes it easy for the horse to pick you up.
Right.
So if you think of a child being picked up off the floor, you can have the child having a temper tantrum that's almost glued themselves to the floor and doesn't want to be picked up. That I would equate to a down and heavy rider. You have the child that's lifting their arms up and saying, pick me up, pick me up. That's likely to be a rider that's too light, and they're likely to come up off their seat bones and not be connected to their horse. And then there's the child that kind of lets you pick them up, but is happy for you to do so. And they're going to have the right amount of tone
Mm-hmm.
in their body.
Right. So we're talking now about this whole idea of Feldenkrais of right distribution of tonus, right? This
That's
idea
right.
of how it's distributed, and and it seems to me that if I have this feeling of comfort in the saddle, then that tonus will distribute itself, or is the aim to center it downward?
There's a centering towards the pelvis and the lower abdomen. There's a centering that makes the core of your body, your torso, to be stable enough that you can move your arms and your legs independently. But even your arms and your legs need to have sufficient tone in them for them to do what you want them to do and not just be flapping in the breeze.
So you mentioned the image of yourself in writing, but you also use imagery in your work.
Yes, I do.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the imagery we use very often, I will give somebody an image. So let me go back to the rider that's too down and heavy on the horse. I might say, well, if you were sitting on a gym ball, a Swiss ball, and I was trying to inflate it, would I be able to inflate the ball and you'd be in a place where you'd lift up with as the ball inflated? Or would you be squashing the ball down so that I couldn't get any more air in it? Yeah. And that idea that you can support your own body weight so the ball could inflate underneath you might help be enough to lift that rider up. Another way that we might use for the same rider might be, imagine you're hung in a harness. So the harness is holding you up from your pelvis like a baby bouncer. And what we try to do is find the image that works for that rider, so that when the rider's on the move, they've selected the words that work for them, and then that's the words that I feed back to them as reminders as they're going around the arena.
So do you ever include, and maybe you do, and this is just, this other imagery is like another layer.
Yes.
The idea in our work, in Feldenkrais work, where, I imagine that my right shoulder is doing something, or again, I'm not a rider, but
Yeah.
imagining that I'm gripping and releasing, in other words, using specific somatic imagery versus visual imagery from the outside.
Yes, but very often it's combined with external imagery in terms of, I'm trying to think of a simple example, that if you want the horse to, if you imagine the horse stepping more to the left, yeah, mm-hmm. It is possible that in your body you will create that step, yeah. Unfortunately, some riders do the counter thing, because sometimes it's counterintuitive which way you ask the horse to step, to the right or to the left. So you kind of have to guide them with the visual images if they don't do it as their first option.
So would you feel that this kind of resonates with this idea of clarifying my intention?
Yes. Intention is a huge amount of riding, and having your intention to go in a certain direction at a certain speed is paramount, I would say.
So this brings me to another aspect, because so much of our work is about clarifying our intention, yes. Right? And about, if you know what you're doing, you can do what you want, right?
Yeah.
And so when you encounter a student or a rider who you see is maybe getting in her own way, self-sabotaging, either through a lack of clarity of how she directs the horse,
Yeah.
or by some sort of parasitic habit in her carriage. How do you guide her towards seeing and improving from that orientation?
The first step is in the noticing. To kind of go, so let's say, I mean, hands are a big thing in riding. The hands connect through the reins to a bit in the horse's mouth. A well-trained horse should understand that a backward action of the hand means slow down or stop. And if a rider is trying to get the horse going, but they have a slight tension back on the reins because they have some issues with their balance, or they're a little bit afraid of going faster, or they're not quite sure they're in control of the steering, I might ask a question like, is your hand pulling, pushing, or in neutral? And it may be both hands, and it may be one particular hand. Yeah, so they start to notice. And then I might say, and what are you trying to do what is that hand trying to do for you? So that they start to unpick and question, why is it that they're making that action? And then you can start to unpick it and break that as a habit and put in an alternative strategy instead.
So noticing on your part, and then sort of facilitating their ability to begin to notice where they're getting in their way.
That's right. And also where they're getting in their horse's way. So,
right, of course.
Yeah, if they can kind of go, oh yes, I'm pulling, and they can release it very often, then the horse will go forward more easily and be a happier horse for that reason.
And would you say that and I know that you said that you concurrently studied these two modalities at the same time, but this ability for you to be able to notice these nuances in riders, do you think that came from, how has the Feldenkrais method helped you develop that? Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think it certainly enabled me to see not just the symptom, but maybe the cause, because they're not always the same. Mm-hmm. So very often pulling with the hand is a result of not having enough abdominal strength, what people would call core strength, in the torso. And also to see it off horse and on horse. So, we have this idea of what you do on the ground is magnified when you get on the horse. It's magnified again as the horse moves. It's magnified again as the horse goes up through the paces and onto a circle, and then laterally. Each time you make one of those changes, the habit you have on the ground is likely to be magnified. Mm-hmm. So addressing it on the ground, or at least on the horse in walk, will start to break the pattern and give an alternative pattern. And I think I see it very clearly in most riders. Now, obviously, the Ride With Your Mind coach training teaches people to see that, but I think my Feldenkrais training has also kind of enhanced that. So it's kind of synergistic, that the two together make it even better.
Right.
Yes. So finding both the symptom, the cause, and having an option of something to do that will help change the pattern.
So that quote or sentence, you were talking about this idea of how things get magnified and how they come from the ground. Yeah. And I know from some conversations that we had before that that's very much part of the influence of Mary Wanless's teaching on you, right?
That's right, yes.
And so maybe could you say a little bit about her work and her background? Because was she from centered riding, or did she develop her own process?
She developed her own process. She was training to be a British Horse Society instructor, which is a more senior level to where I am. And through her training, she would try harder and the trainers would shout louder at her, but she never felt that she got the same results out of the horse as many of her trainers could achieve. And it was kind of like there was something missing. At that point, she gave up riding altogether and went off and did some other stuff, which actually interestingly included some dance work and some Feldenkrais through the dance training that she did. And then eventually she came back to doing some riding because people were keen for her to ride their horses. And in that period of being able to ride but not having this really big goal that she needed to get to, she started to be more on a noticing place, and started to notice that when she engaged her core, then a particular horse she rode would stop jogging. So it would go from a little jog to a walk, and when she wasn't thinking about her core, then it would start jogging again. She'd engage her core and it would stop. And she also studied physics as a degree subject, and it's like, yeah, there must be a cause and effect, and you cannot sit on a horse and not have an effect. So that effect can be negative or it can be positive, but once you sit yourself on top of a horse, you are going to influence that horse in some way. And anyway, so Mary started to spend a lot of time observing what is it she really did and unpicking it to see what is it that the good riders do that the more novice riders and the riders that struggle don't do. And sort of just about every aspect of riding, she has unpicked it to the baseline factors and kind of developed the way of teaching it from the base upwards.
So you mentioned core several times,
yes.
And that her work was based on a strong core. And when, a lot of times in the Feldenkrais community, there's this, we don't do core strengthening. And how do you reconcile, or maybe does she have a different way of strengthening the core than the traditional way that we associate core strengthening? And how does that relate to your Feldenkrais work, this core strengthening idea?
Okay, so Mary developed, you've got to remember she was writing her first books probably 30 plus years ago now. And she was talking about core. She developed the phrase bear down, which she would describe as to pull your tummy in to make a wall and then to push out against the wall. It's the same as you do when you clear your throat. So if you put your hands on your belly and you clear your throat, so you'll find that your abdominal muscles make a wall and there's a push out from your insides into that wall. At the time, the people Mary was teaching would say, oh, yes, it's like when you give birth, the midwife will say, bear down, push, and it gets that same push. Sometimes that gets misinterpreted as to almost push down through the pelvic floor and push down heavily into the horse. So that's a danger of that wording for that activity. But having that push means that you keep moving forward with the horse. Yeah. So, and you can hold your body still. So if you think about, if you carry a child on your shoulders and the child is wriggling around, they're not very easy to carry, are they? Whereas if they sit really still, then they're much easier to carry. But if they go to sleep, then again, they've dropped all their weight onto you. And again, it's not easy to carry the child when it's sleeping. So again, we're back to this thing about the tonus and being solid enough to hold your frame. And in dressage, you want your horse to hold its frame. You're asking it for it to move in a certain level of tone in its body, and to be able to move. It also has to use its core muscles to hold its guts up and to lift through its back.
So are you saying, and again, I'm not a rider, which maybe is good because I can ask dumb questions.
Yeah.
But if I do this idea, bearing down but not bearing down, that feeling of the abdominal, is that something that the rider needs to hold onto, or do they press release, or how do you work with that element, both off the horse and on the horse, in order to develop that core possibility?
Yeah, it's a holding. It's on. It may increase in volume or decrease in volume, and as you get more experience, you might direct the target, if you like, may shift to different positions in the front of your body. In terms of a Feldenkrais, the Feldenkrais lesson that I find kind of explains it the best is lessons where you lie on your back on a roller and you stabilize yourself while you lift your arms, your legs, and ultimately all four limbs. I've done that lesson now with hundreds of riders. It's probably in the region of 500 plus, I would think. The 8 people that I've had that can lie on the roller and just pick up their arms and their legs, and they're saying, yes, and what next, are all Grand Prix riders.
Are all what kind of rider?
Grand Prix riders.
Grand Prix.
So they're the highest level riders that there are. So all of those Grand Prix riders could just pick up their arms and legs while they're lying on the roller, and they're in balance. They have enough tone in their body to hold themselves in place.
So it's kind of like Feldenkrais's definition of being truly organized is the impression of weightlessness.
Yes.
That they were able to make their arms and legs weightless because of their inner organization.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And they weren't all Feldenkrais practitioners, right?
None of them were Feldenkrais practitioners. But it's a very clear correlation. Mm-hmm. That the Grand Prix riders just make it, making the impossible easy. Yeah, the impossible possible, the possible, I've lost the words.
Easy and the easy elegant.
And the easy elegant, yeah. So
right. And a Grand Prix rider would be elegant for sure.
Yeah, so the easy elegant is the Grand Prix rider, and their inner organization is such that they can hold their body still and move their arms and their legs to give fine directions to their horses.
Mm-hmm. So we've been talking a lot about horses, but I'm just curious how exploring the Feldenkrais method has affected your life in general. I mean, we talked about pain, of course, and when you have less pain, that's probably a big impact. But are there any other aspects of your life where you see that impact?
Well, certainly. I mean, when I discovered the Feldenkrais method and Ride With Your Mind, I was working in an office. I'd been working as a marketing executive for 20 odd years. So I had an office-based job. And once I started to find the Feldenkrais method and the biomechanics teaching, I was starting to think, oh, maybe what I'll do is take myself off and start to teach both the riding and the Feldenkrais. And up until that point, it hadn't crossed my mind. And also up until that point, I would not have been capable of doing all the yard work and the amount of riding that I do now. So having taken away the pain made my body more available. So when I was made redundant from my marketing job, I kind of went, okay, this is it, time to go out and teach. So yeah, I started freelance teaching, and then Mary asked me to take over running her yard, Overdale Equestrian Centre, for her. So yeah, so that's where I am 16 years later.
You know, it's interesting because, you know, we speak about how the Feldenkrais method helps us realize our avowed and our unavowed dreams.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, as you were speaking, I was thinking to myself, well, you know, here she was working in marketing, even though her bio says that you were horse mad since childhood. And I thought, well, what happened to bury the dream? Obviously, this mysterious pain.
Yeah.
But it was so deeply buried that you didn't even think about the possibility, because the pain had pushed aside any idea. And then you discover Feldenkrais, and I don't know, we'll never know whether you would have actually gone ahead and quit that marketing job.
That's
but isn't
right.
it interesting how the universe just went, oh, I think Karin is ready to finally realize her unavowed dreams. And I'm just guessing that this was an unavowed dream, but it sounds like you're living the dream now.
Yeah, I am living the dream. I'm living in the most beautiful part of the UK, in the middle of the Cotswolds. It's, you know, an area of outstanding natural beauty. It is fabulous. And spending all my days with my horses and riding and teaching and working with the horses in their training, it's just wonderful.
That sounds really great. So it does sound like your self-image was also altered during this process.
Yes, I would say so.
Mm-hmm. And where do you feel like you're going in like, if you were to project yourself into the future now in terms of your work with riders, or okay, I have two questions. We'll start with that one.
Yeah. So I'd like to continue working with my clients and having more experienced riders to work with. I think the Feldenkrais method is kind of slowly but surely gaining a reputation out there. More people, I think, are getting to know about us and understand a little bit about what we do. So some of what I'd like to be doing is breaking down some of the resistance to trying the method. That's one of the things that I find hardest, is getting people to give it a go. Mm-hmm. But I'm also training, I would say I'm also training in something called the trust technique, which is another way of working with the horses. It's an off-horse activity, but it's very much about the primary message of the trust technique is to say to the horse, you can be at peace. It's giving them a way that they can release their tensions through emotional feelings rather than doing something with their bodies. And it blends very well with the Ride With Your Mind and the Feldenkrais, because it's kind of like, you know, you think about them releasing, but then once you've built their trust and they've found peace, then they're much more likely to be able to communicate. Horses communicate through body language and feelings. And what I'm saying with the riders is, you get the feelings transmitting correctly through your body to the horse's body, you can ask the horse to do almost anything. the horses need to trust you in the first place and be relaxed enough to hear that communication. There's a lot of horses there that are either switched off, so they don't hear anything, or they're so hyper that they don't hear you. People are the same, aren't they?
Yeah, and it's interesting what you're saying, because, you know, I mean, when you think about the Feldenkrais method and how Moshe said that we're always thinking, feeling, sensing, and moving at the same time. So all of that is included in the Feldenkrais method. Yet most people think about applying the Feldenkrais method strictly from physical functionality. And then you've got your riding with your mind, and you've got trusting the emotions. It's almost as if you're taking these other modalities in order to help integrate through Feldenkrais all these different ways that we can communicate with ourselves and with our horse.
Yes.
So that's really interesting. Well, you know, the other question I was thinking of asking you was if you were to, like, you know, there's probably a lot of riders right now listening to this interview, and if you were to give them one piece of advice or a suggestion of how they could move forward in their own exploration. I don't mean to put you on the spot, because I didn't warn you that I was going to ask this question.
Yeah.
But is there something that you feel you could say, just that comes out from you right now, in terms of all your years of experience, what you would like to share with those riders?
I would say listen to your horse and believe it's a feedback on what is happening. And don't be afraid to explore the opposite of what you might instinctively do. You know, that's a very Feldenkrais thing to do, isn't it? If you think you're going to push, you try pulling first, or vice versa. It's kind of like, you know, sometimes the opposite of what you think you might have to do might be the right answer. And your horses will tell you. You know, try sitting heavier, try sitting lighter. See what they say. They will respond one way or another. You know, explore. Do you have more weight? Do you need more weight on your left? Do you need more weight on your right? Does it make a difference? The horse will respond in some sort of way. And if you're trying to do the same thing over and over again and it's not working, you need to try something different.
Right. What is the definition of insanity, right?
Yeah.
Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
That's right.
So yes, it does. It works in anything, including riding. Well, and you know that in this series that we're doing, we've been asking our speakers to share a favorite quote.
Yes.
Something that influences them. And I was just wondering if you might share with our viewers what you had come up with.
Well, again, I'm going to go back to Mary Wanless and one of her quotes, which is, a rosebud is no better than a rose, or a rose is no better than a rosebud. The essence of that is we are all where we are in our riding journey. And whether you're riding your horse in the first few months, the first few years, or whether you've been riding your horse for many, many years, there's always more to do, and you're just taking the next available step on your journey. So just keep trying to improve. Doesn't matter where the starting place is.
Great. Thank you. So I just want to inform everyone that's watching that Karin has a bonus that's available to everyone. And it's actually 4 free video lessons for riders that if you just click on the bottom of this video, you will be able to access those videos for yourself and be able to enhance your learning even more. So I hope that you all take advantage of that possibility. And Karin, I don't know if there's anything more you want to say. You know, it's really interesting. The sun is coming into your window in such a way that You look like you're on fire, girl. So, oh, there you go. If you back up a little bit, we can see you better.
There you
Yeah,
go.
I just didn't know whether you wanted to say anything in conclusion.
No, it's been great talking to you, and we're out there to make life the best they can be for both horse and riders, and that they're able to enjoy each other's company and dance together as partners.
I love that. I love the idea of dancing with a horse. Someday I'll get on one and feel that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Karin. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And I know that a lot of people are going to benefit from this conversation.
Okay. Thank you, Lavinia.
Bye.
Bye.